Hey there, thanks for stopping by today. Let me ask you something. What happens when federal funding for critical programs is suddenly put on hold? The Trump administration announced a freeze on federal grants, loans, and assistance programs, and it's already raising questions about what this means for programs that millions of Americans depend on, from disaster relief to education and healthcare. And yes, we're even talking about the ripple effects this could have on big names like Social Security and Medicare. It's a decision that touches lives in unexpected ways. And today, we're going to break it all down. Before we get into it, if you're finding this topic helpful and want to stay informed about critical issues like this, consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on important updates, insights, and solutions to the challenges that impact our lives and communities. So, let's start with the basics. This freeze is a directive from the White House, instructing federal agencies to temporarily pause all grants, loans, and other financial assistance while they conduct a review. The goal, according to the administration, is to ensure these programs align with their priorities. Things like reducing waste and cutting spending on diversity initiatives, environmental efforts, and what they call woke policies. On paper, it might sound like a move toward fiscal responsibility, but the reality is far more complicated, and the consequences could be significant. To give you an idea of the scale, we're talking about over $3 trillion in federal financial assistance each year. This funding flows into everything from disaster recovery to early education programs, healthcare research, and infrastructure projects. When that money stops, even temporarily, it creates a ripple effect. Organizations that rely on these funds to pay staff, provide services, or maintain operations are suddenly left scrambling. And it's not just large institutions, it's local nonprofits, schools, and community programs that feel the impact the hardest. Let's talk about disaster relief for a moment. When a hurricane or wildfire devastates a community, federal grants are often the first source of funding to help rebuild homes, repair infrastructure, and support families in need. If that funding is delayed or frozen, recovery efforts slow down, and people are left waiting even longer to rebuild their lives. And it's not just natural disasters. Think about healthcare research. Federal grants fund critical studies that lead to breakthroughs in treating diseases like cancer or developing renewable energy solutions. Delays in that funding can halt progress, putting lives and innovation on hold. Another area that's being hit is education. Programs like Head Start, which provide early childhood education to low-income families, are at risk. Federal grants also play a huge role in funding financial aid for college students. Imagine being a student who depends on that aid to pay for tuition and finding out those funds are suddenly uncertain. For families already struggling with the cost of education, this freeze adds another layer of stress and insecurity. And then there's healthcare. While the administration has mentioned Social Security and Medicare are not directly affected, many other healthcare programs rely on federal funding to operate. Medicaid, for instance, is administered by states but funded by the federal government. If those funds are delayed, it creates bottlenecks that trickle down to healthcare providers and ultimately patients. It's a domino effect that can leave people waiting for care or facing unexpected costs. The administration argues that this freeze is necessary to review spending and cut what they see as wasteful or ineffective programs. They've specifically mentioned targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, as well as environmental programs like the Green New Deal. Supporters of the freeze say it's about aligning spending with priorities and ensuring taxpayer dollars are used wisely. But critics see it differently. They argue that this is an overreach of executive power and a move that could harm vulnerable populations while advancing a partisan agenda. Speaking of criticism, several states are already challenging this decision in court. States like New York and California argue that the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally halt funding that Congress has already approved. Legal experts are divided. Some believe the administration can pause funding temporarily under certain conditions, while others say this goes too far and sets a dangerous precedent. The outcome of these legal battles could have major implications for how federal funding is managed in the future. Meanwhile, the timeline for this review is tight. Federal agencies have until mid-February to report back on which programs are affected and whether they align with the administration's priorities. In the meantime, organizations and individuals are left in limbo. Imagine being a local nonprofit that depends on federal grants to keep your doors open or a community rebuilding after a disaster. The uncertainty creates real challenges for planning and operations. So, what can you do if you're impacted by this freeze? First, stay informed. Keep an eye on updates from the agencies and programs you're connected with. If you're part of an organization, now is the time to explore alternative funding options and reach out to local representatives to voice your concerns. And if you're someone who relies on these programs directly, don't hesitate to connect with local resources or advocacy groups for support. Sometimes, knowing your options can make all the difference. Let's also talk about the power of community. When challenges like this arise, it's important to stick together. Share your stories, connect with others who are facing similar challenges, and advocate for the programs and services that matter to you. These issues can feel overwhelming, but remember, your voice matters. Collective action can create change, and raising awareness is the first step. So this situation is a reminder of how interconnected we all are. Whether or not you're directly affected by this funding freeze, its ripple effects touch every part of our society. From education to healthcare to disaster relief. These programs are here to support us all in one way or another. That's why it's so important to stay engaged, stay informed, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for tuning in today and taking the time to learn about this critical issue. If you found this helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from the information. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this might be impacting you or your community. Take care, and I'll see you next time.